Let's talk about what's happening now with the Chinese Communist Party and kind of where things are at. So, Blinken, Secretary of State, is now saying that the Chinese Communist Party wants to seize Taiwan on a much faster timeline. Now, Xi Jinping doing something that's never been done before, right? It's unprecedented that the head of the Chinese Communist Party with three terms in office. You could talk, for example, about Mao Zedong, who became leader for life by becoming chairman. A lot of people have suggested, as have I, that Xi Jinping is walking in the steps of Mao Zedong, that he's taken a lot of the same steps Mao took to become chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP is divided in such a way where you're not going to have one person in charge of every piece of the party. The military is separate. The security apparatus are separate. Certain economic sectors are separate. The leadership of the party is separate. Xi Jinping being just the leader of the party, if he loses the other parts of this, just make him a figurehead. It means nothing. Now, given the situation, Xi Jinping has done something that no Chinese leader has done previously, unless you talk about Mao Zedong. And he's going to be challenged now with kind of legitimizing his role. How do you legitimize your role? Well, you start fulfilling your promises. You start doing the things you'd said you'd do. And the CCP for a very long time has been talking about defeating the United States, has been talking about, defeating the West, and has been talking about taking Taiwan. And Xi Jinping has made the Taiwan issue, seizing Taiwan by force possibly, one of his main issues. And he hasn't done it yet. And it looks bad for him. So what might he do? Well, as Blinken is saying, he might seize Taiwan on a much faster timeline. Let me go over this, folks. Epoch Times had this story. They said China's communist regime intends to move against Taiwan on a much faster timeline than previously believed, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who warned that Chinese leader Xi Jinping is determined to wrest control of the self-governing island, potentially by force. It says that Blinken made the remarks on October 17th at an event jointly hosted by the Hoover Institute and Stanford University, alongside former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Further in it states, and this is him saying it now, in many instances that poses a challenge to our own interests as well as to our own values. And he argued that the United States is seeking to maintain the post-World War II liberal international order, while China aims to impose a profoundly illiberal order on world affairs. If you were to go by Duginism, if you were to go by the way that the Chinese Communist Party and also the Russian regime view international power structures, they would say that the 20th century was defined by a battle between three different government forces: communism, fascism, and liberal democracy. Now, the liberal democratic system did win. Yes, the United States is a constitutional republic. Many countries in the world that do practice some form of democracy are not constitutional republics. They're just democracies. Liberal democracy is the defining political system right now. Liberal democracy is the system being promoted by the United States. Liberal democracy is what the United States attempts to implement when it overtakes a country and tries to do a regime change or change their system of government. Now, liberal democracy is what's at risk right now, and what threatens to replace it is just basic communism. Now, if you were to ask me, liberal democracy has its flaws, but it's not nearly as bad as communism. It's not nearly as bad as fascism. And right now, you do have essentially the globalized world order behind liberal democracy, but moving more towards a fascistic type scenario. You can look at the World Economic Forum. The United Nations is really moving towards more of a fascist system. And of course, a lot of the powers that be, including Russia, China's heavily involved with them, are also trying to move it more in that direction as well. That's also manifesting in the areas of, actual warfare. And there is the belief there's going to be some kind of, final synthesis of global conflict, where, for example, we will see a third world war, and where, for example, the Chinese Communist Party and Russia believe they will win this third world war. Now, that being said, there's some interesting stuff taking place, and I'm actually trying to wrap my head around it. The Biden administration is starting to take actual kind of strong stances against what they claim is election interference or attempted election interference coming from the Chinese Communist Party. For me, this could mean, one, that the Chinese Communist Party does not want Biden to be reelected, does not want Democrats to win. You can look, for example, at the way that Trump engaged with the Chinese Communist Party diplomatically. Yes, he was very hard on them, but he left the door open for some business deals. Maybe they'd want to roll back the clock. Maybe they want to get someone else in place. Russia as well has turned against the Democrats, of course, because of the sanctions and so on. Trump has been saying for a long time that there would not have been a war in Ukraine if he was still in office. Trump has been saying for a long time that, he wanted to, it seems, actually try to make some deals with Russia, which would have actually divided to a degree Russia from the Chinese Communist Party. Meaning that the really rough scenarios, including for these countries, has actually gotten worse, interestingly, under the Biden administration. And given the situation, things are moving very quickly towards a real war scenario, and things are moving very quickly as well towards these countries becoming less favorable, even towards Biden. And Biden has a lot of ties to the Chinese Communist Party, let's be honest. Now, before I go deeper into this, let's talk first about the election systems. The Hill had an article, and they said that the FBI is warning that Chinese hackers are scanning state political parties. So they're suggesting the CCP might try to interfere in the midterm elections. It says the FBI is warning Democratic and Republican state parties that Chinese hackers are scouring their headquarters for vulnerable systems they could potentially hack ahead of the midterms. Well, maybe not having those voting machines connected to the internet would be a good first start to make sure that doesn't happen, but that's beside the point. And it's saying, according to U.S. officials, the Post, Washington Post, spoke to FBI agents in the field offices have notified several Democratic and Republican headquarters across the country that they might be targets of potential Chinese hacking as the election approaches. Midterm elections coming up in just a few weeks. The officials, however, said that none of the political state parties have been hacked or breached. Now, there was also the arrest of the Conic CEO, one of the Chinese-tied companies it's being accused of having held, basically POI, personal identifying information on Chinese servers. That was a company that was, for example, having a lot of the data on poll workers, and also allegedly had some channels open where data could be manipulated, maybe in China or elsewhere. The CEO of that company has been arrested, is one example of this.